You hear about cruel and unusual punishment, but could it really apply to a child the same way it does an adult, it seems? Counterintuitive, maybe. That's really the core question for our deep dive today. We're focusing on juvenile life without parole, JLWOP, you sometimes hear it called. And our mission really is to figure out if this practice actually fits within the Eighth Amendment's ban on cruel and unusual punishment. We'll look at court cases, some pretty striking evidence, neuroscience, real world data, plus national trends, even how the rest of the world sees it. It's definitely complex, legally and socially. I think some of what we find might genuinely challenge common assumptions.
Okay, let's unpack this.
Yeah, and what's fascinating here is how the Supreme Court's view on juveniles has, well, it's really shifted over time. You look back at Roper v. Simmons in 2005 and then follow it through to Jones v. Mississippi just a few years ago in 2021. The court keeps coming back to this core idea. Kids are just fundamentally different from adults, and it's not just a feeling. It's tied to, their brain's still developing. This affects how responsible we can hold them, their culpability, and crucially, it highlights their greater potential for change, for rehabilitation. So the court has really hammered home proportionality, individualized sentencing. They've stressed that these life without parole sentences for kids, they have to be exceedingly rare. These aren't just small legal tweaks. They touch on really basic ideas about justice and second chances.
Okay, so the court's view evolved based on this idea that juveniles are different. You mentioned brain development. Could you maybe elaborate a bit on what the science actually says? Like, why are they different when it comes to things like responsibility or impulse control?
Right. Well, what's really eye-opening, and maybe not common knowledge, is what neuroscience tells us.
Hmm.
That part of the brain right at the front, the prefrontal cortex, it's vital for impulse control, decision-making, thinking ahead. And studies show it's just not fully mature until, well, sometimes into the mid-20s. It's not just a legal point, it's biology. It helps explain why young people can be more impulsive, maybe more swayed by friends. And they often struggle to grasp long-term consequences in a way most adults don't. This science really does shift how we ought to view their culpability.
Wow. Mid-20s.
Yeah.
That really does put things in perspective. It definitely challenges those traditional ideas of blame, doesn't it? But okay, for many people, the idea of a heightened capacity for change might sound a little optimistic, especially when we're talking about serious crimes. What does the actual data show? Do we see rehabilitation happening in the real world?
That's a fair question. And actually, the evidence for rehabilitation is incredibly strong, really compelling. Studies consistently show that when juvenile offenders who receive these long sentences are eventually resentenced and released, their recidivism rates, meaning going back to crime, are exceptionally low. We're often talking single digits, far, far lower than you typically see with adult offenders coming out of prison. So it's not just wishful thinking. It's a demonstrated reality that rehabilitation for young people is highly effective. They often do go on to be productive members of society.
Okay, so the courts are shifting. The science points one way. The rehab data is strong. Are we seeing this translate into changes on the ground? Like, how are states actually handling JLW now? Is there a trend?
Oh, absolutely. A really significant national shift, actually. It's not just a couple of states. You've got 29 states, plus Washington, D.C., that have now banned JLWOP completely, outright prohibited. And then there are another 6 states where technically it might be on the books, but nobody is currently serving that sentence. So that leaves only, 15 states that still actively impose JLWOP? It really paints a picture of a major societal move away from this practice.
15 states left. And if we connect that to sort of the bigger picture, globally, the view is even starker, isn't it?
It really is. Yeah, the United States is remarkably isolated on this. Among all the countries in the United Nations, the U.S. is the only one that still allows juvenile life without parole. The only one. The global standard, reflected in things like the Convention on the Rights of the Child, judgments from international human rights courts, it consistently rejects these kinds of life sentences for kids. They're widely seen as just incompatible with basic human dignity and, well, the whole point of juvenile justice systems focusing on rehabilitation.
So what does this all mean? It seems pretty clear from our deep dive that JLWOP really clashes with the Eighth Amendment. It looks disproportionate. It kind of ignores what we now understand about how young brains develop, and it just contradicts the solid evidence showing rehabilitation works. We saw the data points, that prefrontal cortex maturing late, those really low recidivism rates for resentenced kids, the big national shift with, 29 states plus D.C. banning it, and then, yeah, that global context, the U.S. standing completely alone among UN nations on this. It's a definite break from international human rights norms.
Exactly. And this raises an important question, maybe something for you, the listener, to really chew on. If our understanding of the brain keeps evolving, and it is, How might that continue to reshape our entire legal system? Especially when we think about culpability, about justice, about what punishment is even for. This whole deep dive shows how science and changing values are actively pushing us to rethink legal interpretations of punishment and really human potential. Knowing this stuff is valuable, but understanding it, applying it, that's key. Hopefully this prompts some deeper thought about what justice truly means for young people.